Why did she feel watched, even in a place as harmless as the cereal aisle? Sarah Mitchell pushed her grocery cart forward, her 10-year-old son Jake hopping along beside her with a basket that was far too big for him but that he insisted on carrying. It was supposed to be a normal day, a quiet day, a day where the past finally stayed in the past. But normal had never stayed normal for long around her. The fluorescent lights hummed above as she skimmed labels, mentally calculating dinner for the week. Jake tugged at her sleeve, holding up a neon-colored box of chocolate cereal with hopeful eyes. The kind Mark used to sneak into the cart when he thought she wasn't looking. She smiled softly. "Just this once," she said, ruffling Jake's hair. He grinned like she'd given him a Christmas miracle. But even while smiling, Sarah's attention was split. Peripheral scanning, exit points, behavioral anomalies, old habits she'd never been able to turn off, even after leaving the teams, even after trying so hard to be someone new, a mother, a widow, a civilian, anything except what she had been trained to be. Then the lights flickered. Barely a second, barely noticeable. Everyone else around her kept moving like nothing had happened, but Sarah felt something coil tight inside her chest. A warning, an instinct sharpened by years of surviving things that were never supposed to happen. She didn't stop moving, but she slowed. She let her gaze drift toward the end of the aisle, then toward the reflection on the freezer doors, watching shapes behind her without turning her head. Nothing, no one unusual. So why did the air feel different? Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she was still learning how to live without waiting for impact. At the checkout, the elderly cashier talked about the coming storm, about the clouds rolling in darker than usual. Jake giggled at a sticker she gave him. The world stayed normal on the outside, but something inside her refused to settle. When they stepped out into the parking lot, the wind had picked up and the sky had gone charcoal gray. Sarah's eyes drifted automatically across the rows of vehicles. Same habit, same quiet paranoia. That's when she saw it. A black SUV with tinted windows, engine running, parked 3 spaces away. It hadn't been there before. Jake was talking about ice cream, about sprinkles, about anything a kid should be thinking about. Sarah angled her body slightly, keeping him behind her as she scanned the vehicle from the corner of her eye. She didn't like it. "Hey," she said casually, "how about ice cream before the storm hits?" Jake lit up instantly. He didn't notice her voice tighten around the edges. They walked toward the small ice cream shop in the center of the plaza, a bright little place with pink umbrellas and smiling cartoon cones on the windows. She kept her pace even, calm, unrushed. No need to alarm Jake unless there was a threat. But she kept glancing back. The SUV didn't move. Inside, the shop smelled like sugar and waffle cones. Kids laughed at a corner table. A teenage server cleaned a spilled shake with impatient swipes. The world looked harmless again, and Sarah almost let herself believe it. Almost. She chose a table with a perfect view of the entrance and the parking lot. Old instincts again. Jake debated flavors while she stared out through the glass, her senses tuned just a little sharper than before. Then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. One message. Blackfish protocol initiated. Secure package. The air left her lungs. For a heartbeat she couldn't move, couldn't swallow, couldn't even pretend the past wasn't crawling out of its grave. Blackfish. That wasn't just a code. That was the code, the emergency extraction signal from the mission that took her husband's life. A mission no civilian knew existed. A mission buried under so many layers of clearance it shouldn't be possible for anyone to reference it. Her pulse drummed in her ears. "Mom, I'm thinking maybe chocolate swirl," Jake said cheerfully. She forced a smile. "Good choice, buddy." But her gaze snapped to the door when it chimed. 3 men walked in. Casual clothes, relaxed posture, But their eyes did not belong to casual men. Her hand drifted instinctively toward the weapon she no longer carried. She cataloged the bulges under their jackets, the careful spacing between them, the way they scanned the room before approaching the counter. Her stomach dropped. Jake was standing right beside them. Her chair scraped back quietly as she stood. "Jake," she said softly, "come here, buddy." He turned, ice cream already melting down the side of his cone. Innocent, oblivious, perfectly unprepared for the nightmare walking toward him. One of the men froze mid-step. Recognition flashed in his eyes. "Mitchell," he muttered. That was all she needed. She pulled Jake behind her, her voice low and steady. "You're making a mistake." The leader smirked, lifting his wrist just enough to reveal the tattoo. A black scorpion. The mark of the cell she helped dismantle during Blackfish. The cell responsible for killing Mark. "No mistake," he said. "You took something from us. Now we take something from you." Jake blinked, confused. "Mom." Her heart lurched. The first man reached for Jake. Sarah didn't think, she moved. Her palm shot upward, driving into his chin with a bone-jarring crack. He stumbled backward, crashing into a rack of waffle cones. The elderly couple gasped. The teenage server froze, eyes wide. "Everyone out," Sarah shouted, pushing Jake toward the couple. "Take my son, call 911. Chaos erupted. The civilians scrambled past the men who were now spreading out, closing in. One drew a gun. Sarah grabbed the nearest object, a heavy metal ice cream scoop, and hurled it with surgical precision. It hit his wrist, sending the gun skidding across the floor. She closed the distance before he could recover, twisting his arm behind him until the joint gave with a sickening snap. The leader was already circling her, drawing a serrated blade from his jacket. "You're supposed to be retired," he sneered, "a grieving widow playing house." She positioned her body between him and the exit, between him and the direction Jake had been taken. "And you're supposed to be smarter," she said, breathing steady despite the fire building in her chest, "than attacking a mother in front of her child." He lunged. She dodged, but the blade kissed her forearm, leaving a burning trail of red. Pain flared, sharp and bright, but her mind split it cleanly into two, the pain she could feel and the pain she could use. Then the scream came. Outside. High-pitched, terrified. "Mom!" "Jake!" Her world narrowed to pinpoint. Through the glass storefront, she saw two more men from the black SUV grabbing him. The elderly couple tried to intervene but were shoved aside. Jake's eyes met hers, wide, terrified, pleading. The leader smiled. "Now you understand," he said. "This isn't about you, it's about what you know." Her pulse hammered so hard her vision blurred. She steadied herself against the counter, breathing once deeply, enough to find the calm inside the storm. The calm she'd needed on battlefields far worse than this. "You have a traitor in your ranks," the man continued. "Someone who wants what you hid." Her body went cold. But she didn't answer. She couldn't, not yet. Because there was only one truth echoing inside her now. They had taken her son. And every instinct she'd ever buried was rising to the surface, sharp and unrestrained, ready to burn the world down to get him back. What kind of mother freezes when her son screams for her? The question hit Sarah like a blow as she sprinted out of the ice cream shop, her wounded arm dripping onto the pavement. She barely felt it. All she felt was the echo of Jake's voice, the raw terror in it, the way it shattered something deep inside her. She had heard men scream in war zones. She had heard teammates call for help. She had heard her husband's last breath crackle over a failing radio. But Jake's scream was different. Jake's scream was a knife. The parking lot spun into chaos as people fled toward the shops. A woman dropped a bag of dog food. A man ran in the opposite direction. Car alarms blared from somewhere she couldn't place. But Sarah saw only one thing, two men dragging Jake toward the waiting black SUV. Her heartbeat pounded like a war drum. "Move!" She forced her legs to push forward, but the world intervened. The leader from inside slammed into her from behind, knocking her to her knees. Pain shot up her spine. "Stay down," he barked, grabbing the back of her neck. She slammed her elbow into his ribs, twisting free. Her breath came ragged. Her blood was pooling onto the asphalt, her muscles screaming. She didn't care. She rose. But by the time she staggered to her feet, the two men had shoved Jake into the SUV. He pounded on the window, face contorted with terror. "Mom!" Sarah ran. The SUV peeled out with a screech, wheels fishtailing on the wet asphalt just as thunder cracked overhead. She sprinted after it, lungs burning, legs threatening to collapse. She could almost touch the back of the vehicle. But it accelerated, vanishing into the storm-darkened road. Her fingers closed around empty air. "Jake," her voice tore itself from her chest, raw and broken. It echoed across the lot, swallowed by the wind. The world stilled. Just for a second. Then the leader grabbed her arm again, but she spun, slamming him into the hood of a parked car. Her forearm throbbed, every heartbeat sending fire through the cut, but she pinned him easily. Her wounded arm, her grief, her fear, none of it mattered now. "What do you want?" she hissed, pressing her knee into his spine. "Why go after my son?" He twisted, laughing through the pain. "It's not him we want, it's what you're hiding." "I'm hiding nothing," she snapped. He smiled, blood dripping from his lip. "Everyone's hiding something, Mitchell." For a moment, Sarah faltered. That word, Mitchell. She hadn't heard it spoken with that much venom since the day she left the Navy, the day she walked away from the world that killed her husband. But she didn't buy the man's bravado. She didn't buy the confidence. He was stalling. Stalling for what? Sirens. They were faint at first, then grew closer, gaining speed. "Back up." The man's expression changed, fear flickering in his eyes, not of her, but of what was coming. He twisted violently and threw himself backward to break her grip. She held on, but her wounded arm buckled, and her fingers slipped for half a second. It was enough. He broke free and bolted toward the alley behind the shop. She chased him. Her vision blurred as rain began to fall, the first drops heavy and cold. The alley smelled like oil and wet concrete. The man slipped behind a dumpster, scrambling over it. She followed, her breath sharp in her throat. Then he spun, knife flashing in the dim light. "You should have stayed quiet," he snarled. She caught his wrist with her good hand, trying to control the blade as they slammed into the wall. He was bigger, heavier, unafraid of drawing blood. But she was trained for far worse. She slammed her knee into his thigh, then pivoted, using his momentum to drive him face down onto the concrete. The knife skittered away. She pinned him again, ripping his radio from his belt. Static hissed, then a voice came through, cold, authoritative. "Status." The pinned man coughed blood. "We have the package." "Package." That word stabbed into the wound already tearing open inside her. Jake. They were dehumanizing her son, turning him into an object, an asset, a tool for leverage. Her fingers clenched so hard around the radio, she felt plastic crack. "Bring him to extraction point Echo," the voice continued. "The mother will talk once she sees what we can do." Sarah's blood chilled. They didn't want Jake. They wanted her. The voice continued. "If she resists, terminate the asset. We only need her alive." The ground tilted beneath her. "Terminate. Asset." Her heart clenched so painfully, it felt like something was breaking apart. She pressed the man's face harder into the concrete, her voice trembling with fury. "Where are they taking him?" He smirked through bloodied teeth. "You're already too late." She hit him. She didn't even realize she'd done it until she felt the sting in her knuckles. She almost hit him again, the rage clawing at her throat, but she stopped herself. She needed him alive. She needed. A hand grabbed her shoulder. "Ma'am, police." She jerked back, spinning reflexively into a defensive stance. 3 officers stood behind her, weapons drawn, rain soaking their uniforms. The pinned man took advantage of her instinctive retreat and tried to scramble away. One officer tackled him. Another pointed at Sarah's arm. "Ma'am, you're bleeding. You need medical attention." "I don't need anything," she rasped. "My son has been taken." Her voice cracked on the last word. The officers shared a concerned look. "Let us handle." "No," her voice sharpened with an edge they weren't prepared for. "You can't. These men aren't random criminals. They have a target, they have resources, they have a plan." Lightning split the sky above, illuminating the alley. And for the first time since the abduction, Sarah felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Fear. Not for herself. For Jake. He had never been part of this world. He didn't know the rules. He didn't know the cold logic of people who valued leverage more than lives. And somewhere out there in the dark, her little boy was being driven toward a place she didn't know, toward men she didn't understand, toward a threat she wasn't prepared for. But there was something she hadn't told the officers. Something she hadn't told anyone in 3 years. Something buried in her home, in a place no one would think to look. Something Mark had died protecting. The encrypted drive. The insurance policy they swore they would never use, unless the enemy came for them. Unless the past came back. Unless someone initiated Blackfish. The rain poured harder, washing blood from her arm, chilling her to the bone. Her jaw tightened. She finally understood what the message meant. They weren't just coming for the drive. They were coming for the truth. And the truth had just put her son's life in jeopardy. She lifted her head, eyes filled with a cold, relentless fire. "Take me to my house," she said softly. The officers hesitated. "Ma'am." "I need something," she whispered, her voice cracking with pain, rage, and a mother's absolute certainty. "And if I don't get it, my son won't survive the hour." Why did the road back home feel longer than the entire war? The police cruiser's lights strobed across the wet pavement as it sped through Harborview's narrow streets. Sirens muted, rain hammering down. Every sound felt distant to Sarah, as if she were submerged underwater. Only one thing cut through the numbness, the empty space beside her. Jake wasn't there. Her fingers dug into the seat so tightly her knuckles whitened. Every bump in the road sent a jolt through her wounded arm, but she didn't acknowledge it. Pain was irrelevant. Pain meant nothing compared to the image playing on a constant loop inside her mind, Jake's terrified face pressed against the SUV window, his small fists pounding, his voice ripping through her heart. "Mom!" She blinked hard, forcing her breathing to stay even, but she was losing her composure, losing the calm she needed, losing time. "Ma'am," the officer driving said gently, "we'll find him. We've sent out patrols. Highway units are checking exit routes. The FBI." "They'll be too slow." Her voice was flat. "These men are trained. They know how to disappear." The officer exchanged a glance with his partner, who sat in the passenger seat. He hesitated before speaking. "Then, what exactly do you expect to find at your home?" She didn't answer. Not because she refused, but because answering meant admitting a truth she had been avoiding for years. A truth heavy enough to destroy lives. A truth her husband died carrying. Instead, she whispered, "Just get me there." They turned into her quiet neighborhood, rows of weathered blue and gray houses lined with dune grass, the ocean visible between the gaps. Her home looked heartbreakingly normal. Porch lights still on. Jake's bike leaning against the railing. A pair of rain boots lying tipped over where he left them earlier. Her chest tightened. The cruiser pulled in. Officers stepped out, scanning the area with hands on their holsters. Sarah didn't wait for permission. She pushed open her door and stormed toward the house. Behind her, one officer called, "Ma'am, please slow down." She didn't slow. Her hands shook as she unlocked the front door. The smell of home, warm, familiar, safe, hit her with brutal force. It nearly buckled her knees. Jake's half-finished Lego set on the coffee table, his school papers scattered across the couch. The jacket he'd worn this morning lying crumpled on the floor. She reached down and touched the small sleeve. Her breath broke. For a moment she couldn't move. One moment. Just one. She allowed herself to feel the terror clawing at her insides, the guilt wrapping around her throat. The crushing thought that she should have done more moved faster, fought harder, predicted everything the moment the lights flickered in the store. Then she shut it all down. Emotion later. Action now. She stood, wiping rain from her eyes, and walked toward the hallway. The officers followed cautiously. "Ma'am," one said, "we need to clear the house." "It's clear," she replied quietly. "How do you know?" "Because if they were here, I'd already be dead." She kept walking. She reached the hallway vent, a perfectly normal air vent placed on the wall at knee height. The same one Jake had once taped a superhero sticker onto when he was younger. She had peeled it off, telling him vents needed to stay clean. He didn't know the real reason she cared. She knelt. Her injured arm protested, but she ignored it. The officers watched, confused. "You're sure you're okay?" one asked. "You're bleeding again." "I'm fine," she said, voice steady. Her fingers traced the screws on the vent cover. Except they weren't screws. They were biometric triggers. She placed her thumb against one, then her index finger against the other. A faint click echoed, and the cover loosened. The officer nearest to her stepped forward. "What is that?" "Insurance," she murmured. She pulled the vent open. Inside, wrapped in a faded cloth and sealed inside a waterproof case, sat the encrypted drive. Small, ordinary, almost harmless looking. But it was deadly. The officer crouched beside her. "Ma'am, what is that?" Sarah stared at the drive, memories unraveling like smoke, Mark's shaking hands as he tucked it into the vent, his voice telling her they were in over their heads, the way he kissed Jake's forehead before leaving for the final mission. He never came home. This little piece of metal was part of why. She swallowed hard, her voice barely audible. "This is what they want." The driver frowned. "Why would a terrorist group want a computer drive from your home?" "Terrorists didn't kill my husband," she said softly. Both officers froze. Her hand shook as she lifted the drive. She hadn't touched it in 3 years. She had hoped she never would again. She had prayed the past would stay buried. But the message earlier, Blackfish Protocol initiated, wasn't a coincidence. Someone knew. Someone wanted the truth out, or buried forever. She exhaled shakily. "This drive contains classified information from Operation Blackfish, a mission I participated in with my husband. Information that never made it back to command." "What kind of information?" the officer asked. The silence that followed was heavy. Too heavy for a small living room filled with toys and half-finished homework. After a long pause, Sarah whispered, "Evidence that someone in high command was selling weapons technology to terrorist networks." The officer stiffened. "Names," one pressed. "Who?" She shook her head. "I won't say without federal authorization." But she already knew one name. The man the leader mentioned. Admiral Westfield. The same man who had held Jake at Mark's funeral, telling him how proud he should be of his father. The same man who placed a medal on her husband's empty chair. The same man who looked her in the eyes and told her the enemy was responsible. He lied. And now Jake was paying for it. Her chest tightened painfully. She stood, gripping the drive so tightly it cut into her palm. One officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, if this is true." "It is." "Then we need to get you to a federal facility immediately. You and the drive." She shook her head. "No." Both men stared. Her voice hardened. "They took my son because of this. I won't hide behind walls while they use him as bait. That's not a decision you can make right now. It's the only decision that matters." She walked to her bedroom, ignoring their protests. She opened her closet, pulling down a locked case from the top shelf. Her hands hovered for a moment. She hadn't opened this since retiring. Inside lay her sidearm. The one she turned in went into government storage. This one didn't. It was her father's, a weapon with no serial, no record, no trail. She loaded it with shaking hands. The officers stepped into the doorway, alarm rising. "Ma'am, Sarah, you can't just arm yourself and go after them alone." She looked up, her eyes raw, fierce. "What would you do if it was your child?" The officer flinched. The answer was obvious. Sarah slid the gun into a holster and grabbed the drive. Her hands were trembling again, not from fear, but from the weight of what came next. The officer nearest her swallowed hard. "We can call the FBI, get a tactical team." "They'll take hours," she said. "I don't have hours." She stepped past them toward the door. Rain still slammed the windows. Thunder rumbled deep and low, like distant artillery. The officers followed. "Where are you going?" She paused only long enough to whisper the truth she'd been avoiding since the moment she saw the SUV. "To bring my son home." And though she tried to hide it, her voice cracked on the last word, the raw edge of a mother who had already lost once and refused to lose again. But there was something she hadn't told them. Something she hadn't admitted even to herself. She didn't know where they were taking Jake. Not yet. But she was going to find out. And someone, somewhere, was going to answer for what they did. Why did the silence inside her car feel louder than the storm outside? Sarah gripped the steering wheel so tightly her fingers burned, the wipers fighting the downpour as she sped away from her house. She had left before the officers could stop her, before they could argue, before they could drag her into protocols and procedures that didn't understand what urgency felt like when your child's life hung in the balance. The encrypted drive sat on the seat beside her. So small, so innocent-looking, yet powerful enough to shatter the lives of men who hid behind medals and salutes, the men who killed her husband, men who were now using her son as leverage. A strike of lightning split the sky in front of her. She didn't flinch. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number again. Her pulse jumped. For a heartbeat, she feared it would be a ransom demand, a video of Jake tied to a chair, or a masked voice issuing impossible orders. But when she glanced at the screen, she froze. It wasn't a message. It was a location pin. A single blinking dot on a map. Her heart hammered. They wanted her to come. Alone. Of course they did. She swallowed hard, her throat tight enough to ache. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She shouldn't trust it. She knew it was a trap. Every instinct screamed it. Every memory from her years in the teams warned her. But Jake was there, and she would walk through fire to reach him. The rain intensified as she followed the route, twisting away from town, away from lights, away from anything that felt remotely safe. The road grew narrower, trees bent under the wind. The world turned dark and wild. Her pulse raced, but her thoughts were steady, sharpened by grief and fury. She replayed the last hours in her mind, the attack, the leader's chilling words, the officers trying to stop her. And beneath all of it, Mark's voice. The last time they spoke before he deployed. "If something ever happens, protect Jake. No matter what, you're stronger than you think." She blinked away tears. The GPS marker led her toward an old industrial sector outside town, abandoned warehouses and half-built structures that developers ran out of money for years ago. She slowed her car to a crawl as she approached, every sense on high alert. She parked behind a rusted dumpster, killed the engine, and sat in the darkness. The rain pounded the roof like fists. She didn't move. She breathed once, steadying herself. Then again. Then she opened the glove compartment, retrieving a small, black device, a tactical tracker with a thin adhesive strip. She powered it on and pressed it under the driver's seat. Insurance. If she didn't make it back. She stepped out, gun holstered beneath her jacket, the encrypted drive tucked against her ribs. The storm soaked her immediately, but the cold only pushed her further into alertness. She scanned the area. One main warehouse. No lights except a faint glow seeping under a side door. Two parked vehicles, the black SUV and another one she didn't recognize. No movement, no guards visible. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that meant someone was waiting for her to step into a kill zone. She approached the warehouse slowly, her footsteps silent despite the rain, her breathing deep, her ears tuned to every creak, every rustle, every whisper of wind. She reached the side door and pressed her ear against it. Nothing. She pushed it open a fraction, enough to slip inside. A single flickering bulb hung from the ceiling, casting yellow light across a cement floor stained with oil. The air smelled stale, metallic. Shadows clung to the corners like living things. She took one step, then another. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears as she scanned the room. "Come out," she whispered. "If you wanted me here, I'm here." The words echoed. Then a voice answered from the darkness. "We knew you'd come." She spun, gun raised. The leader emerged slowly from behind a support beam, his face bruised from their earlier fight. His hands were raised loosely, mockingly, as if he didn't feel threatened at all. He nodded toward her gun. "You won't need that." "I need my son," she said, her voice trembling with controlled fury. He smiled, a cold curve that never reached his eyes. "You'll see him, after you give me what I came for." She kept her gun steady. "Where is he?" He motioned with his chin toward a shadowed corridor behind him. "Safe, for now." Her heart clenched so hard it almost stopped. "Let me see him." "First," the man said, "the drive." Sarah's jaw locked. She took a step closer, eyes blazing. "I give you nothing until you prove my son is alive." He tilted his head. "You were always stubborn. Your husband was too. Look what it cost him." Her blood turned to fire. But she didn't shoot him. Not yet. He clicked a small remote and a screen hanging from the rafters flickered on. Grainy footage. A dim room. Jake tied to a chair, blindfolded but breathing. A guard standing in the corner. Sarah's knees almost buckled. But she forced herself still. Alive. Jake was alive. Her breath came shaky, not from fear, from relief so deep it hurt. The leader lowered the remote. "Now the drive." She lifted her chin. "You never said who sent you." He smirked. "You already know." "Say it." A beat of silence. Then Admiral Westfield. Her heart thudded painfully. "You're lying." "Are we?" He took a slow step closer. "Why do you think your husband died? Why do you think your team was scattered? Why do you think you've been monitored for 3 years?" She flinched. "Monitored?" The man watched her face carefully, his voice almost gentle. "You think you're free, Mitchell. You think you walked away. No, they've been watching, waiting. The moment they saw you try to build a new life, he got worried." "Worried about what?" "That you might finally talk." She swallowed hard, the truth crashing down on her like the storm outside. Mark's death. Her retirement. The years of coincidences. The surveillance black SUV she thought was paranoia. Not paranoia. Reality. Her hands shook. She hated that he could see it. The leader smiled slowly. Give me the drive and maybe you walk out of here alive. She didn't speak. She didn't breathe. She thought of Jake, tied, blindfolded, terrified, her little boy, the one who trusted her more than anyone else in the world. She thought of Mark, bleeding out during a mission that wasn't supposed to go the way it did. She thought of every promise she made to protect her family. She slowly reached into her jacket. The leader's eyes gleamed. Yes, smart choice. But Sarah didn't pull out the drive. She pulled out her phone. Highlighted on the screen was one word. Send. The leader's expression flickered. What is that? Sarah's voice was steady, calm, deadly. You're not the only one who can send a signal. And she pressed the button. The warehouse lights snapped off with a loud bang, plunging the room into darkness. The leader shouted. Somewhere in the shadows, someone chambered around. And Sarah moved first. Who prepares you for the sound of your own heartbeat, becoming the loudest thing in the dark? The warehouse lights died in an instant, swallowed by pitch-black silence. Not dimmed, not flickered, killed. The kind of blackout that wasn't mechanical but triggered, controlled, engineered. For 3 long seconds, nothing moved, nothing breathed. Even the storm outside seemed to hold its breath. Then, a metallic click. A gun being readied. Not hers. Not his. Someone else. Sarah didn't wait to find out who it belonged to. She dropped to the floor, rolling behind a stack of wooden crates she'd spotted earlier. Her movements silent, practiced, guided more by instinct than by vision. She felt the gritty cement scrape her arm, the wound reopening, the warm trickle of blood mixing with rainwater dripping from the rafters. Somewhere across the room, the leader cursed under his breath. She's moving. His voice cut off as a gunshot cracked like lightning in the darkness. A bullet slammed into the metal beam near her head. Dust rained down. Her pulse exploded in her ears. She didn't fire back. She couldn't risk hitting Jake if they were positioned behind the corridor. She needed to relocate. She crawled along the floor, each movement deliberate, barely shifting her weight. The darkness was suffocating, but it was also her ally. She had fought blind before. She had trained for moments exactly like this, under Lieutenant Tennistel's brutal no-light, no-sound drills. Hours of crawling through pitch-black kill houses until she could feel enemies before she saw them. Tonight, those memories might save her son. Another gunshot exploded, this one closer. What was that? A second voice hissed, one of the men, disoriented by the blackout. She cut the power, the leader snarled. Find her. Sarah's breath stayed low and controlled. Fear existed, yes, a deep, primal fear, but it lived under something larger. Purpose. Jake's life. Mark's truth. Her pulse steadied as she reached the far wall and pressed her back against it. Gradually, her eyes adjusted just enough to make out faint outlines. The glow from the emergency exit sign, the shape of the crates, the silhouette of one attacker moving cautiously with a gun raised. She didn't move yet. Not until she knew where Jake was. She strained to listen. The building groaned with storm wind. Rain hammered the roof. Water dripped rhythmically near the back wall, but beneath it all she heard something softer. A muffled sound. A choked breath. Small trembling. Jake. Her heart lurched. He was alive. And close. She turned her body toward the faint noise, inching along the wall until she reached the opening of the corridor she'd glimpsed earlier. Her fingers brushed the edge. She paused, listening. Footsteps. 2 sets. Guarding him. Her jaw tightened. Back in the main room, the leader's voice cut through the darkness. Mitchell, enough of this. You want your son. Give me the drive." His tone was different now, louder, strained, cracks of panic bleeding through. The blackout had rattled them more than he wanted her to know. She didn't respond. Instead, she unclipped the small tactical flashlight strapped to her belt, low power, narrow beam, the kind she wasn't supposed to still possess after retiring. She held it in her palm. Waited. Calculated. Thunder rolled overhead like a warning. 3, 2, 1. She pressed the switch. A thin white beam cut through the black like a knife, not toward the men, but toward the ceiling above them. The sudden flare blinded them by reflection alone. "What the?" "Cover your eyes." But Sarah didn't wait for their confusion to settle. She lunged forward, using the momentary blindness as cover, sprinting across the warehouse floor with quiet, controlled strides. Her feet barely touched the ground. Her breathing fell into rhythm. She moved like a shadow. The corridor opened into a small room, no lights, no windows. The smell of rusted metal and damp concrete hung heavy. And there, a small shape in the corner. Jake. Tied, blindfolded, trembling. His breath hitched when she approached. "Mom," his voice cracked with fear. She ripped off the blindfold. His eyes adjusted slowly before widening with shock. "Mom." He struggled against the ropes. She cut them with a small blade she kept in her boot, the same kind Lieutenant Cuddy insisted all operatives carry even in civilian life. As the last rope snapped, Jake threw himself into her arms, clutching her with a desperation she had never felt from him before. She wrapped her arms around him, pressing her cheek to his hair, inhaling the faded scent of his shampoo. For 1 second, one perfect second, she let herself feel it. Relief. His warmth. His heartbeat. Then she pulled back, cupping his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Jake, listen to me. We have to move right now." He nodded through trembling lips. "But they said they'd hurt you," he whispered. A tear escaped down her cheek before she could stop it. "They'll never touch me," she whispered. "Not while you're with me." She took his hand and pulled him behind her, just as footsteps pounded toward the room. "Hurry," Jake whispered, fear shaking his voice. They slipped behind the doorway as 2 armed men charged inside, guns raised. "She's not here, the kid's gone. She couldn't have gotten far. We need to find." Sarah emerged behind them like a silent storm. Her left arm wrapped around the first man's throat, dragging him backward into the hallway. Before the second man could react, she slammed the door into him with a brutal kick, pinning his wrist between the metal and the frame. He screamed. She didn't flinch. She ripped the gun from his hand, elbowed him in the temple, and sent him collapsing to the floor. The first man clawed at her arm, gasping for breath, but her grip tightened, a precise chokehold, ending just before unconsciousness. He dropped like a rag doll. Jake stared, stunned but not afraid. He had seen his mother strong before, but never like this. She turned to him, her voice urgent. "Stay behind me, no matter what." He nodded. They moved down the hallway toward the warehouse exit. Behind them, the leader shouted orders, realizing she had reached Jake. "She has the boy, stop her." Shapes moved in the shadows. Boots pounded on wet cement. Sarah raised the stolen gun. She didn't want to kill anyone, but she would do whatever it took. A figure rushed into view. She fired a controlled shot, hitting the shoulder enough to disarm, not enough to kill. Another man appeared. Another shot, leg, tendon, incapacitating. They fell one by one, not dead, but unable to pursue. Jake clung to her jacket, each gunshot making him flinch but not cry. He was his father's son. He was hers. The exit was close. Just 20 feet. 10. 5. A shadow slid in front of them. The leader. Gun raised. Rage carved into his face. "You're not walking out of here," he hissed. "Not with him, not with that drive." She pushed Jake behind her, her body shaking with adrenaline, grief, and something darker. Something she had fought years to bury. "You're wrong," she whispered. He aimed at her chest. "I'll shoot," he warned. "Don't make this harder." Sarah lifted her chin. Her voice broke into a fragile, trembling whisper. "It already is." Then, a second gun cocked behind the leader. He froze. So did Sarah. A calm female voice cut through the storm of panic. "Drop your weapon." The leader stiffened. Sarah's eyes widened. She knew that voice. She hadn't heard it in years. And hearing it now, it felt like the past stepping out of the dark. The leader slowly raised his hands. Sarah's breath caught. Standing behind him, drenched from the storm, her rifle steady, her expression sharp with purpose, was Captain Janet Wolfenberger, her former team leader, her mentor, her friend, the woman Sarah thought she'd never see again. And in that moment, Sarah finally understood. She hadn't pressed send for the power outage. She sent something else. And Janet was answering the call. How do you breathe when your past and present collide in a single heartbeat? Sarah stared at the silhouette emerging from the shadows, rain dripping from her tactical jacket, eyes sharp, rifle steady. Captain Janet Wolfenberger looked exactly as she had the day Sarah last saw her in uniform, focused, unshakable, a presence that changed the air around her. For a moment, Sarah couldn't speak. Janet lowered her rifle just slightly, enough to acknowledge her. "You really know how to make an entrance, Mitchell." A shaky breath escaped Sarah's lips, half a laugh, half a sob. "You took your time." "Traffic," Janet deadpanned. Jake, still clutching Sarah's jacket, blinked up at the stranger, unsure but sensing safety just from her voice. The leader's jaw clenched as he glanced between them. "You brought backup," he spat. "Of course you did." Janet stepped forward, her gaze turning cold. "You're lucky you're breathing." The leader smirked. "Not for long, I imagine." "Not if you don't step aside," she answered. He didn't. Instead, his eyes darted to the exit, toward the storm, toward escape, toward something desperate. Sarah saw it before he moved, saw the twitch in his arm, the shift in his stance, the flicker of violence. "Jake," she whispered, "stay behind me." The leader lunged. But Sarah was already moving. She drove her shoulder into him, slamming him against the wall. His gun clattered across the concrete. He grabbed her wounded arm, squeezing hard enough to make pain explode through her entire body. She gritted her teeth, refusing to scream. Janet moved to shoot. But Sarah locked eyes with her. "No." Janet froze. She didn't need an explanation. She understood. If Sarah didn't finish this herself, the ghost of it would follow her forever. The leader pushed back, grunting with effort. "You can't protect both the kid and the truth. Choose." Sarah's breath burned. Her pulse roared. Memories flooded Mark's smile, Jake's birth, the weight of her sealed trident. Every night she stayed awake wondering if she could be both a mother and a soldier. Her voice broke as she whispered, "I choose him. I always choose him." She drove her knee into the leader's chest, forcing him back. He stumbled, gasping. She grabbed the front of his jacket and slammed him to the floor, hard. His head cracked against the cement. He groaned, dazed. Janet approached, rifle aimed at his throat. "Move again and you won't get a third warning." The leader spat blood, glaring up at them both. "You don't know what you're up against. Westfield won't stop. He's untouchable. He has the Pentagon in his pocket." Sarah crouched beside him, her breathing slowing, her eyes colder than he'd ever seen. "You're wrong," she murmured. "He had my silence, but not anymore." Fear flickered across his face. Then defeat. He didn't speak again. Janet quickly zip-tied his hands, then his ankles. She stepped back, exhaling slowly. "We need to move. Federal units are minutes out. They'll take custody and trust me, he'll talk." Sarah nodded, then turned to Jake. He ran into her arms the second she opened them. She held him, burying her face in his hair, her entire body shaking. He clung to her with a fierceness she'd never felt before. For a moment, the world shrank down to the size of his heartbeat against her chest. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Jake shook his head, tears wetting her shirt. "I knew you'd come, I knew you would." Her throat tightened until she could barely breathe. Janet stepped quietly beside them. "We need to get him out of here." Sarah stood slowly, still holding Jake's hand. Her legs trembled from adrenaline and blood loss, but she forced herself forward. They walked through the warehouse, past crates, past fallen attackers, past shadows that would haunt her for a long time. Outside, the storm had broken. Rain thinned into mist. Police cruisers and federal vehicles screeched into the lot, lights flashing against the wet asphalt. Agents poured out, weapons raised, tactical teams moving to secure the building. Janet flashed her badge. "Stand down, hostiles inside, leader restrained, victims safe." Sarah felt the world spinning around her. Officers shouting, radios crackling, flashlights cutting through the dark. Jake squeezed her hand. "Mom, are we safe?" She knelt in front of him, brushing wet hair from his forehead. "We're going to be, I promise." That was when the federal agent approached, tall, stern, wearing an earpiece and a look reserved for high-level emergencies. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he asked. Sarah stiffened. She hadn't heard that title in years. "Just Sarah," she corrected softly. "Not tonight," Janet murmured beside her. The agent nodded gravely. "We've apprehended Admiral Westfield. The evidence on the drive you recovered is overwhelming. It's going to bring down half of his network." Sarah clutched the encrypted drive in her fist. The drive that had cost Mark everything. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. The agent's expression softened. "You and your son will be protected. Whatever you need, new identities, relocation, full security detail." Sarah looked down at Jake, tired, shaken, leaning into her side for warmth. Protection sounded good. Running did not. She shook her head slowly. "No, we're done hiding, done running. He deserves a normal life, a bright life, and if danger comes, it can find me standing." Janet smiled faintly. "Knew you'd say that." The agent hesitated, then nodded. "Your call, but just know everything you did today, it saved more than your son." Sarah blinked, absorbing the weight of that. As the first hint of sunrise broke through the storm clouds, she guided Jake into her car, wrapping a blanket around him. His breathing slowed. His eyes fluttered. Exhaustion finally pulled him under. She sat beside him, brushing her thumb along the back of his hand. The chaos faded around her. The sirens dimmed. The flashlights disappeared. She felt Janet rest a hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" Sarah looked at her former commander, the woman who trained her, who believed in her, who answered her silent call for help without hesitation. "I don't know," she whispered, "but I will be." Janet squeezed her shoulder. "He's safe, you did that." A tear slipped down Sarah's cheek. "Not alone." "No one worth trusting fights alone," Janet answered. When Janet walked back toward the agents, Sarah leaned against the car seat, watching Jake sleep. His chest rose and fell softly, his fingers twitching like he was dreaming. He was alive. He was here. He was hers. Her whole world, wrapped in a blanket, breathing in the quiet after a night that nearly broke her. She kissed his forehead gently. "You're safe," she whispered. "I promise." The horizon brightened with the soft glow of dawn, warm, golden, gentle, the kind of light that reminded her of Mark, of mornings when he smiled at her over coffee, of all the small things she thought she had lost forever. Maybe she hadn't lost everything. Maybe she was finding pieces again. Slowly, painfully, but surely, she pulled the blanket higher around Jake, letting her hand rest over his heart. Some battles leave scars. Some battles steal everything. But some battles remind you who you are. And Sarah Mitchell finally understood a truth she had tried to outrun for years. You don't stop being a warrior just because the war changes. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And tonight, it acted as a mother who refused to break.